Welcome to presentation number 17 in our series, Retrieving Romans. The title for today's presentation is Retrieving Community or Retrieving Human Community. And we have reached chapter 14 and we'll cover most of chapter 14. This topic here in Romans also includes a couple of verses in chapter 15. And here is how it begins. Paul talks about those who are weak, and we are going to relate that to why he wrote Romans, because it figures in that context too. So, welcome those who are weak in faith, but not for the purpose of quarreling over opinions. Some believe in eating anything, while the weak eat only vegetables. Those who eat must not despise those who abstain, and those who abstain must not pass judgment on those who eat, for God has welcomed them. So here we are in a fraught situation in the Roman house churches. Some division, some tension, some sense of disunity over the matter of eating or food preferences. And this has risen to a level in relation to why Paul wrote Romans. So at the beginning of our series, we looked at various options. He wrote it to counter hostile counter-missionaries. There was the option of the Spanish mission, the notion that this is a theological testament or defense of the gospel, and also as a fourth option to mediate between the weak and the strong. I think the evidence for the first one is the stronger, to contain hostile counter-missionaries, but it is wise to include this and to make you aware that it is also one of the options. Why did he write the letter? Well, he went around here, he goes all over the place, and finally he comes to the weak and the strong, which is the real reason why he wrote it. Like I said, I'm not sure that is true, but you have the point there. So, what to do with Paul as a counselor on diet and foods? You know, here he weighs in on something that is quite a bit part of our everyday lives. And how do we read a text like this in our time, when there is so much said about food, importance of food, the ecological implications of food, the resources of the world and food, such as this famous book by Michael Pauline, The Omnivore's Dilemma. And Paul seems to give us an omnivore in Romans, those who eat everything. That's omnivorous, if I may put it in those terms. So, or we have this book by Jonathan Safran Foer that I have featured earlier, Eating Animals, where he, in a very surprising idiom, actually tries to influence his audience to rethink his or her food habits. Or we go to Mark Bittman, who is a food writer we have looked at before, Animal, Vegetable, and Junk, a history of food from sustainable to suicidal. So these people lift the subject up to a very high level. They make it seem very important. And our question might be, is Paul helping these people, or is he undermining them? Is he making it harder for them to make the point they wish to make? Here is a fourth book by Raj Patel. It was featured in the medical journal The Lancet when it was first published. It is a very good book, very important book in my view. The title is Stuffed and Starved, and the subtitle, The Hidden Battle for the World Food System. And he says that in the world food system today, you have people at the receiving end of the food we eat who are stuffed and overweight and get diabetes and all kinds of lifestyle-related diseases. And then some people are starved. That happens to be the people who produce the food because they are underpaid. And he has an illustration I'd like to show you. You see an hourglass here, and here you have the producers, here you have the corporations controlling market access, and here you have the consumers. And Raj Patel talks about this as the hourglass shape of the world food system, where you have underpaid producers here, where you have a few corporations for some products, just a few, 2 or 3 or 4, controlling market access. And then you have the consumer here, who are offered foods that are unhealthy. It's not good. So food is a topic for our times, and food is a topic in Romans. In fact, it is a topic in Romans more than in any other of Paul's letters in this chapter, chapter 14. And here is another one that is closer to home for me, because my wife, who studied medicine with me at Loma Linda University, this is her, Serena Tonstad, and she has devoted her life to working on food and lifestyle-related diseases, overweight, diabetes, metabolic disease, smoking, and lipids, hyperlipidemia, and has in her career published more than 300 articles that have appeared in scientific journals. And now, is it possible that the Apostle Paul may be a voice in favor of these endeavors, or that he may be someone who really undermines it and says, well, forget about your food advice. God accepts whatever people eat. It's not an issue. And so those are concerns here at the start. And I'd like to show you a little glimpse here from a video from a movie by someone I actually know, by Marianne Thieme, who is a member of parliament in the Dutch parliament and the founder of the Party for the Animals that now have 5 representatives in the Dutch parliament.
Global warming, that's the world's greatest current concern. An inconvenient truth was a real wake-up call to the world. This was a great achievement for Al Gore. However, he forgot something rather important. 18% of global greenhouse gas emissions are caused by livestock farming.
Oh, really? Wow, I thought it was mostly cars.
Nothing is done about it, and we continue to produce animals in the way we do right now. And in that case, the environmental impact is going to deteriorate beyond measure.
If you consider that it takes about 7 kilograms of grain, that's corn and soybeans, to just make 1 kilogram of beef, we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of hectares of soy being planted in former rainforest to provide meat.
I don't expect everyone on the planet to give up all meat. I think that's unrealistic. But I do think we could get people to understand that meat shouldn't be something they have for their own health on as regular a basis as they do have it.
We need to start picking carefully what we eat, how we eat, when we eat it, where we get it from.
Our fork is a powerful tool.
A vegetarian in a Hummer produces fewer carbon emissions than a meat eater in a Toyota Prius. But a vegetarian on a bike is much better.
If all Americans didn't eat meat for just 1 day a week, this would save 90 million plane tickets from New York to LA or from LA to New York.
Well, I cut it there. So we have books, we have videos, we have even a political party in Holland that was founded by a person I admire very much, I have met her. We have hosted Marianne Thiem at Loma Linda University, and we also hosted her here in Norway. And then we have our text in Romans talking about food. And let's read it again. Some believe in eating anything, while the weak eat only vegetables. And vegetables has a very positive connotation in today's thinking about food. And maybe now here it is slanted slightly toward something that is negative. So here I'd like to offer 3 options for how we might approach this chapter. The number 1 is that Paul has a permissive view of dietary preferences. All diets are okay. That's, a sort of theological blessing on whatever we decide to eat. Or this one, Paul is not giving dietary advice. He seeks to overcome communal division. That's his priority. He's not actually thinking that he is here giving dietary advice or health advice, as it were. He is concerned about the health of the community. And that's another option. And then the third one, Paul's advice to the Romans is irrelevant to our situation and can be safely ignored. That is to say, he has a context, a local situation there to which he gives advice, and that situation is not comparable to ours. So it has a limited value. I will highlight the one I think is certainly true, or at least part of this is certainly true, that Paul seeks to overcome communal division. Whether he also, in some secondary sense, gives dietary advice might be true, but the communal aspect is the priority. Retrieving community, unity in diversity, I think that is certainly there. And there is the notion of judgment, because these 2 groups that will be called the weak and the strong, they seem to have a positive view of what they are doing themselves, and they seem to look down on the other group and criticize it, passing judgment on it. Who are you to pass judgment on servants of another? It is before their own Lord that they stand or fall, and they will be upheld, for the Lord is able to make them stand. So there is God before whom we live our lives, and we are judged before God, but we should not be pointing fingers at one another. And if we do that, the health of our community will suffer. If we start thinking, oh, those people did that, oh, those people are doing that, and talk about each other that way, that's the end of community. That will not work. And then he moves on from food to observance of days. He talks about judging days. Some judge one day to be better than another, while others judge all days to be alike. Let all be fully convinced in their own minds. Those who observe the day observe it in honor of the Lord. Also those who eat in honor of the Lord, since they give thanks to God, while those who abstain in honor of the Lord and give thanks to God. So now we see that there is a kind of intermingling of food preferences and preferences for certain days, observances of certain days, holy days, whatever it might be. And the weak will be the ones who don't eat and the ones who observe days, most likely. And the strong are the ones who are less selective about what they eat, and they are non-observant, as it appears here. And here, then to my illustration, that there are certain days that are preferred by these in this community. So let's look at what scholars have done with this. In Romans 14, in adjudicating or trying to label or trying to come down to who they are, the weak and the strong. So here in this column are scholars who are proponents of a certain view. Here is how they understand the weak. Here is how they understand the strong. And the majority view here is held by leading Pauline scholars like John Barclay and James Dunn. And they think that the weak, they are Jewish. They are Jewish, rigid believers, rigidly observant Jews. And they think that the strong, they are Gentiles. And they are liberal Gentiles. And guess what? Paul is more in their camp. While he wants to make a case for the weak, he himself has transitioned into becoming a liberal with respect to various observances. But this is not the only view. There are other proponents here. Mark Nanos, who sees Paul as a person within Judaism. He thinks that the weak are Jews who have not accepted Jesus. That's their problem. And he thinks that the strong is a group with mixed ethnic identity. It has nothing to do with Gentiles or Jews. It's mixed. And here we have Keres, who thinks that these are not real people. They are types. They are examples of people. So they're neither Jewish nor Gentile. And the same here for the weak. It's not an ethnic correlation. And the same for the strong. It's not ethnic, not specifically Jewish or Gentile. And here is Reasoner, who says the weak, they are foreign-born Romans with a cosmopolitan outlook. The Pythagoreans, Pythagoras was an ancient philosopher. We have heard about his theorem, and his followers were vegetarians. So, you could be a foreign-born Roman with a cosmopolitan outlook and have a certain dietary preference. It's possible. And Reasoner, likewise, he thinks that the strong, they are native-born Romans with a patriotic outlook. That's how they eat and think. And here the last one, and more on the Jewish side, Torah observers that are ultra-traditionalists. Those are the ones who don't eat, or who only eat lettuce. And here the strong, they are Torah-observant traditionalists. So my point is just to show that there is diversity. It's not like this majority view is the only view, but it is certainly the view that has sort of passed into our reading DNA. That is how this chapter is read, that the weak are Jewish rigid believers who hang on to observances that are not obligatory, and that the strong are Gentile liberal believers. And the most desirable, of course, is to transition from the weak to the strong. That's how it should be. And that's how Luther sees it. Because Luther, he weighs in on this topic here. This is a picture, I think I have taken it myself, in Dresden, in Germany. Luther in front of the Marienkirche in Dresden. So here is what he says in his commentary on Romans. When the apostle here speaks of the weak, he has in mind those who were of the opinion that they were obligated to certain laws, to which in reality they were not obligated. His words, however, are directed above all against the Jewish error, which some false prophets taught, distinguishing between certain kinds of food. Against this, Christian liberty, for which the apostle contends, Many false apostles raised their voice to mislead the people to do certain things as though they were necessary. Against such errorists, the apostle took the offensive with amazing zeal. So here Luther has adjudicated these texts, and it is the Jewish error here that he labels for those who are weak and who seem to hang on to practices. And I was just looking at this in the context of food preferences in Germany with a strong Protestant tradition, and I saw a statistic that Germans now eat 55 million pigs every year. So, and that's ecologically problematic. Whether it is theologically unproblematic, well, it remains to be seen. So, the person who has done the most work on Paul and ethics, what Paul prescribes in terms of conduct, is this man, John Barclay, who is an extremely winsome and very competent scholar on Paul, and he has also written a big book on Paul lately called Paul and the Gift. So listen to what he says about how he envisions things to unfold in these faith communities. So on the surface and in the short term, Paul protects the law-observant Christians. In the long term, and at a deeper level, he seriously undermines their social and cultural integrity. So Barclay is saying that yes, there are the weak, and yes, there are the strong. But which group is sort of theologically the better group to be in? It's better to be among the strong. So, because Paul slants the argument in favor of the strong, as Barclay sees it, most likely the weak will disappear by and by. And this is what he will say more clearly. Paul regards key aspects of the law as wholly dispensable for Christian believers, and more subtly, his theology introduces into the Roman Christian community a Trojan horse, which threatens the integrity of those who sought to live according to the law. By the terminology he uses here, he puts the weak at a disadvantage. And then again, still quoting Barclay, Jewish Christians were right to fear Paul and those bearing gifts. That is to say, Jewish Christians, or those who favor these practices, they will have no friend in Paul. They might want to avoid Paul because he is not on their side of the playing field, as it were. And he uses the term Trojan horse here, and he talks about those bearing gifts. So let me explain that. Most of you will know the story, but here is the story. So in Homer, in the Greek ancient epics, there is a battle between the Greeks and the Battle of Troy, the city of Troy in Turkey. And the battle continues, goes on and on and on. And at some point the Greeks withdraw, they retreat. But they leave behind a horse as a kind of going away gift for the Trojans. So they built what is called the Trojan horse. So the Trojans are wondering, should they take that horse into the city? You know, it is a gift horse, very nice. So they decide to take the horse inside the city. But inside this horse, the Greek has hidden lots of people, lots of soldiers. And in the dark of night, those soldiers inside the horse will open the gates of Troy, and the Greeks will come in and defeat the city. So this is the Trojan horse. And Barclay says that Paul has made a Trojan horse in the argument in Romans 14 that will in the end make the strong prevail over the weak. You follow the argument? Well, I have one more illustration here about Trojan horses in the time of computers. Should we open the attachment? And you get the point. Well, let's see what the text says. We will go on here. So my point here again is, I've showed this slide already, but my point is really that although this is a majority view and a commanding majority view, it isn't the only possible view. And I'll just feature one person who thinks otherwise, Mark Nanos, who is someone I have heard and read stuff by and met a couple of times. So here he says in his book, The Mystery of Romans, this is him, this is Mark Nanos. He's a very earnest person and a very good Pauline scholar. He says that to assume that the weak were Christian Jews who were unwilling or unable to give up the practice of the law and Jewish customs because they were deficient in their faith, in that they failed, and this is here he quotes none, in that they failed to trust God completely and without qualification. Or further, quoting now done, that's both of these are done, yeah. In this case, in his quotation here, in this case the weakness is trust in God plus dietary and festival laws, trust in God dependent on observance of such practices, a trust in God which leans on the crutches of particular customs and not on God alone, as though they were an integral part of that trust. Okay, that's what those people say, and Nanos says to talk like that is indeed to fall into Luther's trap. That is too simplistic. If Jews hung on to certain dietary practices, it doesn't mean that they were deficient in faith. They may have many other reasons for doing it, and they may not even be Jews, because the landscape in Romans is more complex. That's the possibility. Well, we are back to our text here in chapter 14. I know and am persuaded. Now he will talk about the strong. So let's hear what he says to the strong. I know and am persuaded in the Lord Jesus that nothing is unclean, koinon, in itself, but it is unclean for anyone who thinks it unclean, or common, koinon again. If your brother and sister is being injured by what you eat, you are no longer walking in love. Do not let what you eat cause the ruin of one for whom Christ died. Here he is talking to the most permissive community and saying, well, think it through. It might hurt someone who, in this terminology, is weak. It could cause the ruin of one from whom Christ died. That's very strong language. So do not let your good be spoken of as evil. For the kingdom of God is not food and drink, but righteousness and peace and joy in the Holy Spirit. The one who thus serves Christ is acceptable to God and has human approval. Let us pursue what makes for peace and for mutual upbuilding. So you have a communal criterion here. So let's just look at the illustration here, because we do have different dietary preferences here. Here we might be at the table of the strong, and here is the table of the weak. Let's just say that nutritionists in our time will say they have a good time at that table, but they have a much healthier time at this table here. So we have to keep two thoughts in our heads at the same time. And still talking about the strong, and we are headed toward the end of the chapter 14. Continuing to admonish the strong is what he does here. Do not, for the sake of food, destroy the work of God. What's the work of God? It is to build up a good community, a community where people feel safe and where they do not feel judged, where they can come, whoever they are, with whatever they are. Everything is indeed clean, kathara, but it is wrong for you to make others fall by what you eat. It is good not to eat meat or drink wine or do anything that makes your brother and sister stumble. The faith that you have as your own conviction before God. You can think a certain way. You may decide to practice something else if it is more communally constructive. Blessed are those who have no reason to condemn themselves because of what they approve. But those who have doubts are condemned if they eat. And this could be doubts about what should I eat and what should I not. Or it could be doubts, should I eat if it hurts my brother and sister, if it causes them to stumble, as it were. So those who have doubts are condemned if they eat, because they do not act from faith. For whatever does not proceed from faith is sin. So here, putting a stumbling block in front of someone, and that is made to be a big issue here, and it is addressed to the strong. So now you may be surprised, because it seemed like John Barclay's view is on the winning team, that he is on the winning side of this argument. And then there is an alternative, and I will show her in a minute, Beverly Roberts Gaventa. So here in John Barclay's view, the problem group is the weak. They should gradually transition to become strong. But to Beverly Roberts Gaventa, the problem group here is the strong. That what they represent is more damaging to the community than what the weak represent. And the characterization here, they have a faith deficit, the weak, but the strong, they have a faith excess, as it were. They have an insensitive kind of faith, as it were. And then here the defect, lack of faith. Here, lack of concern, lack of social and communal concern. Here the key concern in this paradigm, John Barclay's view of the weak, is a purely subjective concern. But here there is a social and a soteriological concern, because if the strong continue, they may actually damage the faith of the weak and cause them to fail, as it were. So here he makes a prognosis that the Trojan horse that Paul has planted in Romans 14 regarding the weak, they will eventually vanish. They will disappear from the community. But in Beverly Gaventa's paradigm, the weak are to remain. That Paul makes a good case for the weak and for protection of the weak. So how do they adjudicate this at the end? Barclay adjudicates it with a preference for the strong, that their argument will prevail, and she does it for a preference for the weak. I think she is right. I admire John Barclay. He is really an astute person, and his command of Paul's ethical vision is without parallel in many ways. I don't think he hits the mark on this one. Listen to what Beverly Gaventa says, she is now at Baylor University and has been the president of the Society of Biblical Literature. The weak, are they a danger to the other group? The strong are a danger to the other group. Are the weak a danger, or are the weak endangered? That they are at risk for disappearing, as Barclay says. Those who eat only lettuce may be an annoyance. They could conceivably prompt impatience and even rudeness on the part of others. But it is hard to imagine a situation in which their limited diet would cause others to fall. To fall into what? So it is innocuous in some ways to be weak. But it is not innocuous communally to be strong. That's her view. And I think she has the keener read of the situation here. Just a few points of reflection before we add things up here. None is likely to call themselves weak in the faith voluntarily. And when Paul uses these terms, he has probably had some message from Rome that they talk about each other this way. So it's likely that the epithet weak is imposed by the dominant group that seems to be the strong. It must have been apparent to Paul's audience that he intended to reverse the shameful status of the weak. I think this is Gaventa talking like this, that he is intervening on the behalf of the weak. The formulation eating everything is broadly drawn, including everything edible, and probably extended considerably past actual practices. He is using terms that are not precise with regard to practices. They are labels, they are metaphors. The word for that is translated vegetables is actually lettuce. And there is no one, not even strict vegans, who eat only lettuce. You can see the point, and it's not a tenet of Jewish belief either. It is possible to see Paul's admonition as a countercultural attempt to break the entrenched habit of shaming nonconformists in Roman culture. So, because that could be a cultural feature, that you look at some people a certain way and call them names and so on. Paul does not want that kind of culture to be adopted in the faith community. He wants a community that sees each other in a different way. So, don't rush to adopt the majority view here. That's the point of this slide. Stop and think about these other options and see if you see nuances here that need to be taken into consideration when we look at this passage. When we look at the Romans as a whole, here at the beginning of Romans in chapter 2, and here at the end of Romans in chapter 14, we see that here at the beginning, he talks about judging. And he talks here at the end about judging in the context of the community. You might say that there are perspectives of judging outsiders and judging insiders, judging the world and judging whatever is going on inside the community. So I set it up like this, a message concerning those outside the community, those without, and those within. And we've read this before, it's been a while. Let me read it again. Therefore you have no excuse, O virtuous person, you and all who judge others, for in passing judgment on another you condemn yourself, because you, the judge, are doing the very same things. Should one look at the world with a judgmental attitude? No, Paul says. Should we judge those without? No, he says. We should instead be more self-critical of ourselves, be more put ourselves under scrutiny. That's the message here at the beginning of Romans. What about here in chapter 14? Who are you to pass judgment on servants of another? Should we judge those within? The answer is no, we shouldn't. We should not have that kind of approach to life, that disposition to pass judgment on us others. And here the same text again with the verb highlighted, judge, ho krinon, judgment, krines, and the terminology is the same here. So you can see that the topic is somewhat related. Who are you to be the judge? O krinon. Just like here, why are you judging krineis, your brother? Let us therefore no longer judge krinomen, one another. Can you see that there is a sort of thematic sense to this, whether to judge and be judgmental toward the world in which we live, whether to be judgmental to others in the faith community to which we belong. And on that subject, what to do in the faith community, I have for some years been aware of Dietrich Bonhoeffer's book, Life Together. And I would like to read a statement of what he says about how to think in the faith community. Those who dream of this idealized community enter the community of Christians with their demands, set up their own law, and judge one another and even God accordingly. They stand adamant, a living reproach to all others in the circle of the community. They act as if they have to create the Christian community, as if their visionary ideal binds the people together. Whatever does not go their way, they call a failure. When their idealized image is shattered, they see the community breaking into pieces. So they first become accusers of other Christians in the community, then accusers of God, and finally, the desperate accusers of themselves. This is how community fractures, when we have the attitude that we assess and evaluate the others in the community. There is no faith community to which this is not relevant. And certainly in my own faith community these days, this problem is rampant. So, just to round things off here, because Paul talks about the days, and some people think he must be thinking about the Sabbath. So why not mention my own book about the Sabbath, The Lost Meaning of the Seventh Day, and then make a claim here that food and days, they belong or might be seen in an ecological perspective. How about this? Food and food choices are important ecological issues in our time. And here about days, many of our ecological sins consist of denying creation the necessary periods of menuha, rest. So here we have food and days as relevant to the well-being of the world. Has Paul made it difficult to make food and the Sabbath relevant topics in our time? Many think so. The tradition thinks that he has basically erased something there in Romans 14. And then the question of medicine. How does medicine and theology communicate with each other when the subject is food? Theology says it's all great, all of it. And medicine says, well, there are some things you shouldn't eat. It's not healthy and it's not good for the world. And here, someone who endorsed my book, Marva Dawn, who died in 2021, I was sad to see that. She has written very major things about the healthy faith communities. And she says, to return to the Sabbath, to the Sabbath keeping is not nostalgia. Rather, it is a return to the spiritual dimension that haunts us. In an age that has lost its soul, Sabbath keeping offers the possibility of gaining it back. In contrast to technological society, in which the sole criterion of value is the measure of efficiency, those who keep the Sabbath find their criteria in the character of God, in whose image they celebrate life. So here, if we were to read Romans as though now there is no longer any room for the Sabbath, now there is no longer any room to talk about food, that would be ill-advised. We might say in that case, if that's what Romans prescribes, then its relevance is diminished. It is not relevant to our situation. I really love this book by Judith Shulevich, who writes in the major newspapers and magazines in America. She is a Jewish, observant Jew now. She wasn't initially. She wrote this book, Sabbath World, Glimpses of a Different Order of Time. Just one statement from her book, her wonderful book. When and if the Sabbath goes, here are the forms of time that might go to. Non-instrumental time, bounded time, shared time, and rhythmic time. We need non-instrumental time to remember our human condition, as Arendt put it. We need bounded and shared time in order to become a society. And we need rhythmic time to make the previous three a habit. Those are her advice. And we are still reading Romans 14, conformity and diversity. What is Paul's answer? Community in conformity or community in diversity? His answer is community in diversity. We accept that. And then we do see that this is a problem. And I will just throw in this one as a kind of aside, but this is a leading politician in Norway who is prominent, who features her Christian beliefs very prominently. And she is seen as someone not very friendly to immigrants. And here is something she said that I felt hit at me. Here in Norway, we eat pork, drink alcohol, and show our face. There is an anti-Muslim slant to this. But I am born in Norway, and I grew up not eating pork and not drinking alcohol. So what am I to do when she says that the character of a person in Norway is to eat pork and drink alcohol? I hope you can see the point in relation to a kind of argument against diversity and unity in diversity. In 2017, Alec Ryrie, who is a historian, church historian in Britain, wrote an amazing book called Protestants, the Radicals Who Made the Modern World. It was written on the 500th anniversary of Luther's Reformation. And when I got to the end of the book, I was completely floored, because this is what he says at the end of the book. What new causes will animate and divide the next generation of Protestants? What's the future of Protestantism? He predicts, well, it's a justification by faith, salvation by this or that. Listen to this one. My guess is that some Protestants will rediscover the spiritual importance of food. You know, and this is in light of Romans 14 too. This may be justified on health grounds as a way of honoring the bodies God gave us. It may be justified with reference to the Old Testament dietary laws, for which some Protestants have always hankered, like me. It may be justified on the grounds of the environmental damage or the use of scarce food resources that are associated with animal husbandry. Eat less meat. It may be justified on animal-centered grounds, whether the specific cruelties of industrialized farming or the wider intuition that consuming fellow creatures is wrong. It will also be opposed, both on classic grounds of Christian freedom, and also, of course, because many people like eating meat. But this is a horizon of the future, making it legitimate, theologically legitimate, to talk about food again. Here is my summary. The weak and the strong in Romans 14, the weak and the strong represent real people with a sense of identity as to who they are. It is highly unlikely, in my view, that the weak are ethnic Jews and the strong Gentiles, or that they are rigid Jews and liberal Gentiles. I think one should take that assumption with a grain of salt. Paul is not deploying a Trojan horse that endangers the communal prospect of the weak. His goal is rather to curb the insensitivity of the strong. Romans 14 here is a good text for the tension between conformity and diversity, and it adjudicates in favor of diversity. Romans, especially Romans 14, is a good text for reflection on what it takes to build a trusting community, within which members do not need to worry whether they are good enough.